What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, the real Adam Coleman. Y'all know what it is, man. Tru-ID Apologetics. And we are back one more again, man. If you've been wondering where I've been at, man, I promise you it's not my fault. I've been trying to get my real estate license, all that kind of stuff together. So I've been scrambling. But no better way to come back than to have a dynamic guest, my guy, Pastor Brandon Washington. What's happening with you, bro?
Good day, man. It's overcast and rainy today, so I'm glad to have this moment of hiding from the weather here in Denver.
That's all right. That's all right, man. Um, so I kind of go back and forth, man. I mean, like on the one hand, I want to be in my professional interviewer mode, but you family though, you know what I mean? Like you people. So I mean, I'm I'm gonna be kind of just relaxed, chilling today
Yeah,
as we
we got you.
dialogue about quite a few things, man. Shout out to Nate 2D2 in the chat. Good to see my man Nate 2D2. Shout out to Tyler Lot in the chat. Good to see y'all. Everybody definitely hit that like button, that share button, so we can get people let people know what's happening, man. The president, Phil Fox, is in the building. Phil Feezy. You know what I'm saying? I'm definitely gonna give him a shout out here in a little bit because I see you point in your book, which we'll be discussing in a second. You shouted out one of the folks that I've heard about through him. I think it was Mark Charles you quoted in a particular section. So we definitely gonna touch on that. So shout out to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's good to have you, bro. With a great occasion, you know what I'm saying? You have the book coming out here in just within 24 hours, right? Is that right?
Tomorrow.
Comes out tomorrow. Burning house. Burning house. How you feeling about it?
I feel great about it. I've experienced publication opportunities before, but this is the first time it was a solo work, a trade book that I wrote from cover to cover. And it was more than a notion, and there was some hard times along the way. In fact, I often tell people I had to take breaks so that I could maintain some mental health along the way because it was painful writing some of the book's content. And now that the day before the release date is here, I feel like this must be what it's like. I don't want to get into trouble for saying this too emphatically, but this must be what it's like for the baby to come forth for a mother. This is after several months of labor, the baby's finally here.
So now I don't want you to get both in trouble. I mean, my wife has had five of our children. We just passed Mother's Day. You know what I mean? So anytime you made that comparison, you're in danger of taking that L. You know what I mean? You don't want to tread too heavily on that one. You know what I'm
saying? I know it's far short of the real thing. This is just a shadow of what my wife endured giving birth to our children. I know that.
There we go. We got to make sure we clean up, put that little disclaimer in there. You know what I mean? But no, seriously, man, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for this work. I really would encourage people to go out and get it. It's obviously it's available at Amazon and wherever books are sold. To go ahead and get that pre-order so you can get yours as soon as possible. I want to dive in and say this, that as like when I really got serious about Christ, as far as in my adult years, I felt like I didn't have a Christian Black intellectual heritage to draw from, at least in modern times. And I felt like there wasn't anybody who was writing to me as a Black intellectual. And your work, man, this Burning House, I feel like really touches people in that vein, like for people who are thirsty to not only, love God with their heart, but also with all their mind. They really want to stretch out and grapple with serious things. I feel like this is what your work is. Like this is not something that is a casual read in the sense that you can just pick it up, put it down, and that's it. I really would encourage people to read the work of Burning House as carefully as you wrote it. To read it as carefully as you wrote it, because there's so many gems, in there, man. And it's kind of like, I mean, I'm an 80s baby. I come from the hip hop era where lyrics actually mattered. I don't know what Cat's talking about today, but I'm just saying, when I got into hip hop, I was interested in that rapper who could say something, and you listen to that song 4 or 5 times, and you finally realize, oh man, that punchline or that double entendre, he said this or he said that. Like that's how I looked at a Burning House. I'm saying it's one of those seminal works that just keeps on giving. I'm saying as you invest time into it. So I just want to say thank you for your work, man. And I really can see that wrestling that you were talking about. It really pours out in the pages. Take us into that a little bit. You talked about how you took a break sometimes. As a writer, as somebody who was carrying this burden, what was that experience like, putting that to paper?
Yeah. Okay. I want to back up a second and affirm something you just said. I once heard, I think it was Ta-Nehisi Coates say this. He said, "Writing is revising," and it took me a while to learn that. So, um, your first draft is just that: is getting the ideas, the notions on the page, and then you come back to make it something that would potentially be pleasant to read, especially when the subject matter is complicated. You want it to be something that is artistic quality to it. And so I too am an 80s baby. I think I have a few years on you, but I was born in the 70s, but I was aware of life in the 80s.
Gotcha.
And when I think of hip hop, I'm going to be this person for just a minute. I'm far less careful here than I am with the birth thing. I am anti mumble rap.
Okay,
Because
yes and amen on that, bro. We're on the same page, bro.
I grew up in a world where I grew up in the context where KRS-One was breaking it down for us, and while he doesn't get a lot of credit, while Chuck D doesn't get a lot of gravity for being a just a artistically strong person, the content was there, and so just how do you say hard things carefully? How do you say them creatively? How do you say them in a way that makes people want to read it? So, with that in mind, some of my favorite writers, I remember the first time I read The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis.
Oh yeah.
And I read a paragraph that I understood, fully understood. But I went back and read the paragraph again because it was like a roller coaster ride. And I just wanted to do it again. Just wanted to have that experience all over again. And a part of the revising process was getting that there. Another thing that became a complication, though, and I mentioned this earlier, the rehearsing some of the history that got us to where we are now, much of which I did know, I already knew, but some I didn't. And the stuff I didn't know lent context. It patinaed the stuff I did know. And it made for very difficult moments. The history itself wasn't a problem. It's the fact that I'm reading this history knowing that in the present we are downplaying or dismissing or outright revising this history and its present, its ongoing consequences, and that is causing injury. And I want to be careful here that I'm not saying it's causing injury to others. It's causing injury to me. So the book is written to people who are a part of the evangelical camp that I identify with. I call them my white eternal siblings. But they don't see the world that I see. And they treat me as crazy because I see something that they do not see. The idea is if I don't see it, then it's not there. And I was often troubled by the fact that I was never giving a legitimate or reasonable hearing on these things that I'm observing. And when I would see this history, when I would read this history and its present implications, it would cause me a deep wound. And I would have to stop. I have a friend who's a professor at Denver Seminary. He's a professor of counseling, and on a regular basis, I would sit down with him, and we would just go to breakfast, and he would ask me the hard healing questions because he knew what I was dealing with in this writing process. And I know that there are certain people in our city who thought there was something wrong with us because these two grown men are sitting at a breakfast table wiping away tears as we're unpacking some of the complexities. But I needed to have those moments so I could get all the way to the final chapter of this book.
Man, that's so powerful, man. There's a couple of different directions I want to chime in on. First of all, I want to join with you in just that aspect of the experience. Obviously, being on the reader side of it, there is this sense of kind of re-traumatization almost. I think that actually before I go here, one of the things I love about the book is the pace of the book. I love the pace of your work, and what I mean by that is, but you definitely say some hard things, like you're knocking over some real sacred cows here. But before you really begin to do that, you take time to lay out your historical method, like how are you approaching history, right? how are you thinking through the way history has implications for today? You're really laying out for the reader. So by the time you get to those hard questions and those hard sayings, if you will, you've laid a groundwork that allows any reader, any honest reader to enter into your intellectual process, and gain something from it. So I thought that was powerful. But what's interesting for me, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this. And I knew some of the history with respect to the doctrine of discovery, when it comes to this notion of the Pope saying, hey, whatever lands, this European nation or that European nation comes across and it inhabits first, have discovered it, and y'all can't beef over it. Y'all can't fight amongst yourselves along those lines. That's a quick and dirty rendition of it. But as I was reading through it, something hit me that I just never really considered, that prior to this exploration, and these European nations going out into the so-called New World, in some ways it was a bloodbath in Europe for quite a while.
Yes.
The Goths and the Visigoths and the Normans and the Franks. And you have all of these different tribal groups that, in a sense are predecessors to the nations that we're familiar with now in Western Europe, who were literally killing each other, for land and so on and so forth. And in some ways they made a pact with one another. They kind of resolved those things for the most part. But with, you can look at the doctrine of discovery is that turmoil, that aggression, all of that is turned outward from Europe to everybody else. And so the doctrine of discovery in some ways resolves the European internal fight, but then projects it outward.
Exactly.
And when I thought about that, I was just like, underlying that is just this presupposition about European value, at the expense of everybody else. And it was just another layer of dehumanization that I hadn't even thought about. And so that I got mad all over again.
Yeah.
I was just like, golly, man. But it was things just like that. I was kind of wondering what you thought about. Like, did you encounter things just like that, where he's like, man, I just didn't know this piece, and maybe I had to sit down with it for a couple of days to reel from it some.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, I didn't go into the book does not contain an exhaustive history on the bloodbath that was occurring in Europe,
right?
And it's because there was you dealing with a word count boundary when you're putting a book out.
Sure.
A lot of stuff found its way to the cutting room floor. But to the broader point you're making, the decision was made that it's inappropriate for us to kill ourselves in this way. So instead of fighting over the finite land we have in Europe, it makes much more sense for us to expand our reign to other parts of the world. And one of the first places to get that hit was Africa, starting in North Africa and working its way down, especially along the west coast of Africa. And I noticed that the concern about killing for the sake of land was not as carefully considered in Africa as it had been in Europe. And I think that was a moment where those who are African were automatically categorized as the other. They're not us. So some of these ethical concerns do not apply here. And acquisition of land is a birthright because of our European identity. And in addition to that, when they got to Africa, they realized that the culture was fundamentally different from their perspective anyway. It was fundamentally different language, different dress, even different approaches to how worship occurs.
That's right.
And so the argument here is it's bad because it's different. They never got around to assessing the cultural distinctions on their face. It's bad because it's different. These people are bad because they are other. And the solution to that is to conquer them and culturalize them.
Right.
And the culturalization included freedom to enslave them. And that authority came from popes. So the Pope's agenda was twofold, is to expand the reach of Europeanized Christianity, expand the reach of the Roman Church. And that can occur at the expense of people who are already occupying the land that is being discovered. I put the word discovered. My wife and a few other people brought this up. They noticed that in that chapter, I consistently put the word discovered or discovery in quotes.
Right.
You discovered land that's already occupied.
It's already there, right?
They happened first in Africa, and then when Columbus accidentally discovered the so-called New World, another phrase that should be in quotation marks. When he accidentally discovered that, it gradually, because of the expansion of England, progressed to North America after Spain conquered South America. And the argument was very similar there. Indigenous peoples, especially in South America initially, indigenous peoples were not the legitimate owners of the land, because to be a possessor of land, you had to be a European Christian representative. And the Pope would then give authority. And because they were concerned about there being conflict across European nations, it was the Pope who would mitigate whose land this discovered space is. And initially it came down to Spain and Portugal. So the Pope literally divided the planet in half.
That's crazy.
Drew a line from the North Pole to the South Pole. First, he started about 400 miles off the coast of Europe, off the coast of the Azorian Islands in Europe. And then Portugal complained. So he moved the line over westward and got a piece of South America, which is why to this day, South American is predominantly Spanish speaking. The sole exception is Brazil, because when he moved the line over, Brazil was given to Portugal. So in Brazil, it's Portuguese because of that. And there's also implications of it. We call indigenous Americans, Native Americans, Indians, because Christopher Columbus thought he thought the planet was smaller than it is, sailed all the way around the planet and landed in the Indus Valley, Asia. And so he called the people there Indians. We call Caribbean islands the West Indies because that's where he thought he was. Europe,
that man was lost.
He got lost.
He got lost, bro. Yeah, right.
And then Europe defined the whole planet based on his erroneous discovery. And that persists to this day. And he was in fact a hero for generations. He is under some scrutiny now, but he was in fact a hero for generations. We've named provinces. We named our capital city.
They're on the calendar, right? Yeah.
We named a country in South America after him.
That's right.
And it all comes down to, the whole point of this was, Europeans have a dominant culture to which all other cultures should submit. And as evidence of that, when we discover the land is now ours. And you have one or two options: be killed or assimilate. And assimilation often included live the rest of your life in bondage. And all of that authority came from a pope.
Wow. And so what makes matters even worse, and I promise y'all, the book is written with a type of optimism that I definitely want to be reflected, in this right here. But just some of the more shocking pieces of the book come out to me is that, as you were talking about, just this notion of, essentially white supremacy is essentially what it boils down to, but just the duplicitous nature of it. You were talking in the book about it really wasn't a mystery to Europeans that Africans did indeed have civilized societies. They obviously were in trade with the Congo. Yeah, hey, I do a little something. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? But that's what I found fascinating. Is like, it wasn't some sort of, we stumbled across these people and they're a bunch of savages and we just they knew that they were assigning to people this lower social caste and this lower that wasn't due these people. They knew that. And I was like, man, just reading that, I just had to pause for a second. I was like, I had to really reflect on it. I was like, wow, like this was not an accident, and it was not something that was they knew it was contrived, And
Portugal had trade treaties with African nations before they enslaved them.
Right.
And Alameyehu Makonnen, who's an African missiologist who now resides here in America, his question was, if you considered them near animals, inferior humans, why would you enter into trade treaties with them? And that was a noteworthy thing for me. I think it was a convenient thing. I want to carefully revise something you said. Okay. It's not a correction, it's a subtle revision.
Sure.
Because in today's terms, the language would be white supremacy. But in the 15th century, in the 14th century, the notion of white was not a thing.
Correct. Good.
That
That's right.
emerged
Yeah.
in the 16th century. So that's why I very deliberately say it's that the ideology behind many of these acts was the assumption of European cultural superiority. And there were conflicts between European nations, but all of them can say, at least I'm not African, at least I'm not North or South American. You can place me anywhere on the hierarchy you like, but at least I'm not them. Even in America, to be Irish, to be Jewish, to be Italian, that you were not white.
That's
You
right.
were in those three groups until the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
That's right.
So their agenda was to Europeanize Africa and the Americas. And that's how we get to this complicated conflict that dates back centuries and it's still fruit right now.
So let's go there, and I appreciate that revision, because I do think that's significant, because we don't want to be anachronistic, reading things into history where they aren't there, And I want to go there for a second, because you grapple with this early in the book, Now, as you know, we talk about philosophy, man. I'm a philosophy head, you know what I'm saying? And so defining one's terms is so crucial to the success of an argument. And I feel like you do that well at the outset, as you get into this notion of whiteness. But I think what happens is, and I'll just kind of, I'm going somewhere with this. I think that when certain groups, perhaps some of the ones that you're addressing the book to, when they hear terms like whiteness, they immediately go to assumptions about one being influenced by CRT and kind of like these modern discussions. But you do a fantastic job of breaking down from a historical standpoint this progression of this notion of whiteness. The idea that in 1809 an Italian person would have been white or whatever, an Irish person, so on and so forth. Right. What was it about that concept that you felt like you wanted to knock it out early? Because I feel like you got there quickly, not in a negative way.
Yeah,
but I could tell that it was of great importance for you to lay that groundwork early on. Like,
I'm glad you said it's in the introduction. In fact, I did that because it's very difficult to write a book that is about racialized terms without carefully avoiding the mistake of legitimizing some of the misconceptions regarding race. So I had to say early on, here's my understanding of race. This is my definition of race, and it doesn't originate with me. And so I want to be very careful that not only that I said it, but I deliberately cited sources outside of me, beyond me, who make the same assertion. But race is it's almost a universally accepted reality now. It's objective.
Yeah, that's right.
Race is a social construct. And the reason it exists is so there could be a hierarchy within humanity. That's the reason we use the language of race. I do not use the word race and ethnicity interchangeably. I believe that ethnicity, like gender, is a biological reality. It's a subtle one. The differences between the ethnicities is not significant. It's there, but it's not huge. I believe that race is an invention. So you can create a caste system with white at the top and black at the bottom. And that's not my interpretation of history. That is what Ulysses S. Grant observed. And that is what Jefferson Davis argued for while he was serving as the temporary president, the provisional president of the Confederacy. That is conceding the existence of this caste system. And then you had evangelical theologians, stalwarts of our faith, come along after the fact, Jonathan Edwards and Robert Louis Dabney, who tried to apply theological language to the existence of that caste system. Because I'm going to end up for the 12 chapters after the introduction, using language that is racialized. And you have to do it so that the book can have some brevity. So I'm going to be referring to people as Black. I'm going to be referring to people as white. But I have to very carefully say I only use these terms because these are the culturally conventional terms. If I had my druthers, I would not have used them. But if I did that, then the book will be twice as long, trying to carefully clarify it along the way. That's why I had to do that. And that's but it is the reason I avoid it, and I hope this stands out. And I'm glad you did what you did, because it sets up an opportunity for me to do this. I am not a critical race theorist. Next month, Adam, Urban Apologetics Volume 2, on June 20th, it comes out.
Oh, and yeah, I got to get that too, right? Yeah,
yeah, you got to copy it. I mean, if nothing else, so you can complete the set. But read it.
Yeah, you go. Right.
Dr. Mason commissioned me to write the chapter on critical race theory, and I remember telling you're about to get all of us in trouble. Okay, so in that chapter, I present a what I would argue is a definition, explanation of what CRT is, and I address their historiography, much of which they inherited from the Black church and the civil rights movement. It's not an accident that a person who comes out of the civil rights movement can have the same assessment of history that a critical race theorist has, because they share an overlapping historiography.
Oh man, you about to get me to say something that
this is a safe place. It's just you and me.
Is it? All right, so let me throw this. This is one of my pet peeves right here, and then I'm gonna get back to it. I just gotta throw this in here real quick. So one of the things that irritates me the most, and this actually does go with your point, is you have a lot of people who have made a name for themselves being anti-CRT, who really didn't start engaging matters about race and justice until it was in response to CRT. And so the lens through which they address these things is through the lens of seeing CRT first, and then seeing everything else, in correspondence with that. The problem is that, as you just stated, there are many ideas that precede CRT. These folks, they don't deal with the antecedents to CRT, particularly some of the critiques of the society at large that flow from a sound biblical foundation that just so happened to have been given voice to through the African American Christian tradition, the civil rights movement and so forth. And so you have a lot of people who have made a name for themselves, you know what I mean? And they don't know a thing about exactly what you just said. They can't go back to the 1800s, so for example, and show where these antecedent ideas were already present. But when they hear them, they're triggered and think, "Oh no, that's CRT." I just had to get that. I just had to get that out.
No, this is how much I love what you did.
Yeah,
my historical method is influenced by W.E.B. Du Bois. When I read his book on Reconstruction in America, and how he addresses the overthrow of Reconstruction. He said Reconstruction did not fail. It was eradicated. It was overthrown. It was rescinded. Okay? Right. When I look at that, I get much of my historiography from him. He predates nascent critical race theory. If you read him, he sounds like a critical race theorist. He predates it by half a century.
That's right.
Much of what you hear in the times when CRT, when a critical race theorist and I agree, it's because we arrived at the same conclusion using two different, or at least discrete, routes to that conclusion.
That's right.
But because we got to the same place, I'm automatically dismissed as a critical race theorist. Do I have issues with CRT? Yes. It doesn't have a gospel.
Sure.
It's excellent at deconstruction, but as a believer, I would argue that at some point you have to be a redeemer. You have to move from deconstruction to reconstruction, which is one of the agendas of this book.
So I want to go there, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
because you in the book, I love the way that you put. And shout out to my brother Lecrae, by the way. You know what I'm saying? Because he had that the powerful song "Deconstruction" on his new album.
Yes,
I know you and I have chatted about that. But you talk about a virtuous deconstruction. A virtuous deconstruction, and which is essentially presided over by God Himself. Like, talk about that virtuous deconstruction, because I think that's exactly what you're getting at here.
Yeah, one of the struggles I have with how people respond to to any critique of racialized evangelicalism is it brings into question many of the sacred cows within evangelicalism. But virtuous deconstruction does that. When I got to seminary, I just told someone this other day, when I got to seminary, I had a Western view of the Trinity, which is to be understood because I grew up in the West, in Western churches, and the dominant seminary in the city where I grew up, which shall remain nameless, is what taught a Westernized perspective on the Trinity. And then I got to seminary and I sat under a professor named Donald Fairbairn, who's a patristic scholar. He has, if you have questions regarding the first 8 centuries of the church, there is no one better. That's his wheelhouse. And when he explained the Trinity, the distinction was subtle but significant. And I said, I have an erroneous view. I came to seminary with an erroneous view of the Trinity. I did not deny 3 and 1. I did not deny that all 3 of them are fully God, but my understanding of the Trinity did not effectively outline the relationship within the Trinity, the social identity of the Trinity. And so the idea of the Son eternally is eternally begotten of the Father. The Spirit eternally proceeds from the Father and the Son. That was something that we did not unpack very well. And I said, why have I not heard this unpacked before? He says, because this is an Eastern perspective of the Trinity. He says, frankly, this is how it's read in the first 8 centuries, and then we Westernized the doctrine. We Europeanized the doctrine. And so there was a moment where I had to revisit my understanding of the Trinity. And you know what that whole process was? It was virtuous deconstruction.
Got you.
It was overseen by a scholar who knew what he was doing. I do believe you can have a deconstruction that is void of virtue. The agenda here is to tear it down just because it's there. But just because someone does that, it does not disqualify deconstruction altogether. If something should be assessed, Adam, you're one of the most practically effective apologists I know.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
It's legit.
Appreciate it.
I was telling my wife about this the other day. I said, Adam went from writing a chapter in Urban Apologetics where he's unpacking the cosmological argument for the existence of God. And I'm talking about footnotes and citing the premier apologists of our day and how they have handled it. He goes from that to doing street evangelism. That book went from being a mark on his resume. It's not just expanding his CV. He's actually engaging people on the street and sharing a comprehensive gospel, and he's willingly giving them copies of this book as one of the tools of his evangelistic outreach.
Hey man, praise God, man.
I'm a fan of apologetics. I have a degree in apologetics and ethics. Okay, I went to seminary initially to study apologetics. Midstream, I changed it to systematic theology, and since I had completed so much of the apologetics program, I went back to complete that since it was already there.
So that's interesting. I didn't know that, and I can see that in the book now that you mentioned it. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, systematic theology is my first love.
Gotcha.
But apologetics is, I would consider them cousins at least. And I mention it to you because I would say that virtuous deconstruction is a requirement of apologetics. You should be answering hard questions, even when the questions are your own. Otherwise, you're not equipped to engage the individuals that you encounter on the street who are going to ask you hard questions. It's an act of apologetics. So for the dominant culture church to say deconstruction of any sort, assessing this thing in any way is inappropriate, that to me is disconcerting, because it's the kind of protest that occurs when you don't want anyone to discover what you may even know is wrong.
All right. Yeah, that's a fact. That's a fact. And now I'm gonna put on my apologist hat here for a second, and go back to something you said a minute ago, because I feel like, as I said before, like, you're not just bringing problems to the table, you're also bringing solutions as well. And one thing I found interesting is we were talking about the Trinity, right? And looking at the more relational understanding of it, right? Looking at that Eastern perspective.
Yes.
Your next step now is to say, okay, well, given the social nature of God, within this triune God with whom we have to do, now what are the implications for society?
Yeah.
How ought we to interact with one another? So now when I'm on the street corner and I'm grappling with questions about, morality, how could God allow this person to do this, or the problem of evil and so forth, we can tie this moral fiber back into the very nature of God.
Yeah.
And I think that's really how virtuous reconstruction should occur, is that as you're really coming to the truth, coming to to understand reality as it actually is, it should move you forward towards other truths. That's what that's what should happen. But then when you have this other type of deconstruction, there's this tendency to it just is what it is. There's a deconstruction, but there's no reconstructing after that. It just takes away.
Yeah.
And I feel like, just in your book, I'm sorry, go ahead, go for it. Yeah.
No, CRT tears it down. I mean, I'm picking on CRT for the moment.
Sure.
CRT tears it down. I think CRT does a very good job of pointing out what's broken. But once they point that out, you don't go through the process of rebuilding something with a sledgehammer. Sledgehammer is there to deconstruct. But when it's time to rebuild, you put the sledgehammer down and you pick up tools that are effective at building something. That's right. CRT does a very good job of tearing it down. I would affirm it, in fact. I think CRT has a credible historiography, because they can look at the past and see consistency. They can see systemic brokenness. But you got to get around to rebuilding it. So it wasn't just good. It was not enough for me to discover that my Western view of the Trinity had complexities. I had to figure out, okay, what is a solid biblical view of the Trinity? And that resulted in a year-long investigation that was exclusively that. Everything else went by the wayside. Everything, like, wait a minute, I'm trying to get a grasp of the Trinity. I get the 3 and 1. I get that everyone is fully divinity, fully divine. I get that one of them is both human and divine. He's the Godhead. I get all of that. But the thing I always struggled with was, in the West, we stop at defining their nature, and we never get around to addressing their relationship. But the fact is, for all eternity, the Trinity was social. The thing that makes, okay, this is a little bit of a soapbox for me.
Okay, no, go for it.
Appreciate it. The thing that makes Christianity, one of the many things, I need to fix that. One of the many things that makes Christianity superior to Islam is the God of the Bible has never had a moment when he was not loving. God the Father has never had a moment when he was not loving someone.
That's right.
It's one of the benefits of having a Trinity. Because from the moment the Father has existed, which is eternally, he didn't come into existence, eternally, he has loved the Son. They've had this communion between them. In fact, Augustine and Jonathan Edwards would identify the communion between them. He would identify that as the Spirit. Okay? He loved the Son eternally. There's never been a day when the Father didn't love.
Oh, I think you muted yourself. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, there you go.
the Allah has never had a moment. Allah did not start loving someone until he created the first human being. And even then, his love is fickle. Okay. And I mention that to you because it's evidence of how for the God of the Bible, love is innate to his character. It's intrinsic to who he is. It's not an accident the Bible says that God is love. You can say God is love in the same way you can say God is sovereign, and that God is providential, and that God is merciful. It's intrinsic to who God is. So if you don't carefully attend to the relationships of the three who make up the Trinity, then you miss that social nature. The West stops at the relationship, and it attends to the value, the characteristics, the attributes that each of them has, and the attributes they obviously all have in common. If you get around to seeing the Trinity as a social God, then they become the definition, they become the standard for all societies.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to know what a society should be, you look at what the social trinity is. So and the part of the world that does that well is the global south, the people who we identify as East. If you look at South America, they are an innately communal, serious, innately communal cultures. Africa is a grouping of innately communal cultures, which affects their ethics. So if one member of the community is injured, one member of the community is sick, if a member of the community is experiencing injustice, then the whole community experiences injustice. It's not an accident.
That's right. That's right.
It's often associated with the illustration is often a human body. I have children who when they were younger, I'll give them this. They don't do this anymore.
Okay.
But whatever they were playing with, when they stopped playing with it, that's exactly where it is. Where they were standing.
Oh my goodness! Right.
Where it is, and because of that, I developed a habit of turning the lights on when I had to get up to go do anything overnight. I need to
Oh yeah, you don't want to step on that Lego, man.
Oh my goodness,
like people joke about it, but that's real, yo. You step on one of them Legos.
Okay, the Tonka trucks, whatever they were playing with, that's where it is. And after I had one moment when I kicked a truck at 2:30 in the morning, and that's when I said, from now on, wherever I'm going, light shall be with me. But I mention that to you because I didn't kick it with my whole foot. I kicked it with the smallest toe. All of the force went into my left pinky toe.
Man.
And I said, and you know what this is like, because the pain is about to be so intense that God, being gracious, gives you a second. It doesn't hit you right away.
Right.
Like, go ahead and sit down. I'm coming to you right now. This is going to come with force. And I sat down waiting for it to come. And when it hit, my entire body responded to my pinky. Right. My body didn't say, that's not my problem. That's the pinky's problem.
Oh, no. Snap. All right now.
Part of the whole. That's how Africans, Tertullian, for example, that's how he saw earthly communities. A member is part of the whole. In the West, we've adopted an individualistic approach to it. We tell people, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps.
That's right. Oh, man.
That's not even biblical.
It's not.
It's not biblical. Not. That's not Matthew 25. Matthew 25 says,
come on,
when
man.
you fed, when you clothed, when you sheltered, when you quenched, when you visited the imprisoned, he says, you were doing that for me. That was an act of service toward me. You were doing that to me. Even Christ identifies with those who have these needs. That's not a global South cultural value. The Palestinian context out of which Christ was speaking was a communal context. When you try to
time out. So you didn't get that from James Cone?
I did not get
of God identifying with the person. You didn't get that from
Adam. See, you about to start a problem. You about to start something, because I'm gonna tell you something that fascinates me. I've noticed that usually, in fact, I had a conversation with Matt about this the other day. The biblical scholars, Old and New Testament, especially Old, tend to get this. It gets lost when you start getting over to theology and apologetics. Because they're not doing historical cultural context in their biblical reading. They're defending an existing idea instead of going to the Bible to get the idea. Christ was speaking in a communal cultural setting. That's why he could identify. It was the reason. It was the reason that Mary didn't have complexity finding somewhere to stay when she was pregnant, and when they arrived in Bethlehem. It was an insult. It was a cultural taboo for you to turn a pregnant woman away. She could have knocked on any given door, and she would have been entertained. She would have been hosted by whoever was behind that door. It was a communal culture that was directed by shame. It would have been a shame to send a pregnant woman away. We live in an individualistic culture. So when you add to that the fact that we deny the implications of history, we will look at people who are dealing with the hardships of that history, and we'll say to them, fix yourself.
Come on, man. That's wild.
Do not ask me for help. But that's not a biblical idea.
It's not.
That's not biblical. We are the children of a social trinity. I'm talking too much.
No, you're good. Hey.
We are the children of a social trinity, which should define what human societies look like. It should set our
Hmm.
course. Instead of being individualistic, we should be what our trinity is: social.
Oh man, see, and this is man, we're gonna need a whole another hour because my mind is going 100 different directions. So let me first by saying this is one of the elements that I loved about the book. And I'm not praising it because you're here. I'm saying this like if this is me talking to my wife, I'd be saying the same thing. Is that you actually give solutions? Sometimes you hear people say things like, "Oh yeah, we need to look to the global south. We need to look to Africa for these solutions," but you actually etch out specific concepts and ideas that tie to the biblical text in terms that arise in these cultures that are a counterbalance at very least to what we've seen over here in the West.
Mm.
But when you talk about cultural influence, I got to bring this up because I feel like, and maybe I've just never encountered it before. I feel like it was a very unique insight, on your part, that I just at least I hadn't encountered it before. When you think about Jonathan Edwards, you know, um, a man who's written however much, he's well known for being a critical thinker, Christian theologian, philosopher, however you want to frame it, who could sit down and write a sermon on the backside of a bill of sale for another human being,
Yes.
a young black woman. You know what I mean? And think about just that tension there. And I feel like I'm just saying tension to keep it light for the time being.
Yeah.
But to think about that and to try to fill in the blanks of how could a person get to that place? I feel like you add in a nugget here that a lot of people might not catch, but you talk about Aristotle.
Yeah.
And you talk about the Enlightenment period in terms of this idea of there being natural slaves, that there being people who are naturally born or oriented toward being like an underclass. And you trace that back to Aristotle, bring it up through the Enlightenment period, and then talk about how that idea finds its way into the church. That right there, man, like that stuck out to me because I feel, and I'm not trying to give away all the gem. I mean, trust me, y'all, however much I'm sharing now, there's like 1,000 other things I could say. But that stuck out to me though, because I feel like just that cultural influence is taken for granted. People assume that, Johnny Edwards is just looking in the Bible and trying to be faithful to the word. He's just a theologian, a man of his time. So yeah, he's a man of his time, but the Enlightenment had informed his time quite a bit. and Aristotle has something to say, that for like share a little bit about that right there, because I felt that was fascinating.
Yeah, one of the things I took away from seminary was many of the people there are under the false impression that when we discuss evangelicalism, we're talking about something that is exclusively theological in nature, and everyone misses the reality that no one does theology in a vacuum. No one.
No one.
So to believe that your theology has no bearing, your culture has no bearing on your theology, that is a misconception. It's willful self-delusion, I would argue. Everybody needs to be disabused of it. We honestly think that I am just reading the Bible and coming out of it with an unadulterated understanding of Christianity, but everyone does it through a cultural lens. A few years ago, I will say a name here because I mentioned his name in the book.
Okay.
A few years ago, I didn't tell this particular story because, again, page limitations. But I watched a panel discussion in which it turned into a Q&A from the audience, and it was in California. And the question, one of the people on the panel was John MacArthur.
Okay.
And the question regarded the fact that the Southern Baptist Convention had recently decided that they were no longer going to assemble any more Bible translation panels that did not include at least one Latino, one Black person, one African American, and one woman.
Okay.
And MacArthur's response was, he basically called that ridiculous. His response was, why don't you just get people who know Greek and Hebrew? But the problem with that is, it is possible to be a Greek or Hebrew scholar, but your culture still influences. And if you need evidence of that, look at the 3 different ways Romans chapter 16, verse 4, Junia, are translated in the New American Standard Bible, the New International Version, and the English Standard Version. New American Standard Bible makes Junia a man and recognizes her as premier among the apostles. The English Standard Version concedes, because the scholarship got better, concedes that she is a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's not one of the apostolic voices. She's celebrated by the apostles. The NIV says she's a woman, and as the NASB said, she is revered. She's highly regarded among them. She's among
Mm-hmm.
apostolic voices.
Mm-hmm.
Junia and her brother were probably leaders of a house church like Priscilla and Aquila were.
Mm-hmm.
Junia, her brother Andronicus, he may be her husband, or he could be her brother, but they were leaders of the
Gotcha.
house church in the same way that Priscilla and Aquila were.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned that to you not to defend one of those three views, but to show you how their cultural and theological predispositions affected how they translated the same Greek text.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And so when you bring a woman's perspective into the room, it may affect how you read such passages. When you
Mm-hmm.
bring the perspective of, and when if the church in America had black scholars in the room when they were deciding on what the national orthodoxy was going to be regarding slavery,
Come
black
on, man.
codes, Jim Crow, I assure you that a black person would have says, "Yeah, we're not big fans of the slavery thing."
Nah, not at all.
The reason we got to where we were was because you deliberately excluded them.
Mm-hmm.
MacArthur has an oversimplified theological method, and it's easy to do that because he believes his is the theological method.
Mm-hmm.
So a
Mm-hmm.
better way to approach that, and this is among the solutions you're mentioning, is for us to experience global integration. What would the church in America have been during Jim Crow had Bishop Desmond Tutu had a voice
Mm-hmm.
among Christians in America? He is speaking out of someone who is enduring apartheid, and he could speak into that matter with some authority that
Right.
his counterparts in the United States could not have experienced. What would have
That's right.
happened if we brought that global integration to the conversation as a means of expanding our perspective on the world and our understanding of our faith in this world? How much different would our circumstances have been had we done that? Instead of doing that, though,
Mm-hmm.
it was put on the margins.
See, that's fascinating because, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like in that section of the book you use the word retrieval. You know,
Yeah.
you're talking about the retrieval, and I think that's fascinating because to retrieve something means you must have had it at some point, right? At some point, right? So this idea of the global retrieval, I found it interesting that as you're grappling with, this question of how to engage and maybe how to redeem and save American evangelicalism, one of the aspects of that solution is to globalize in a
Globalize it.
sense,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
save and to me that sounds extremely sound in terms of ecclesiology, right? Because the notion of there being a segment of the church, that is all to its own, just kind of off somewhere, able to like rewrite doctrine and sound Christian practices is crazy. It's foreign, obviously, to the scriptures. So it makes so much sense to me, ecclesiology, that would have to be an aspect of an answer to American evangelicalism. We need to reconnect it to the global body and allow some healing to occur there. Is that kind of what you were getting at in the book of it?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I am so listen to me. Listen. I will leave this conversation blessed because at least one person actually
Oh no,
raised
I got you. I'm with you.
that. Just you just made my day. The
Right.
the problem with American evangelicalism is we have deliberately siloed ourselves from the global Christian community. And not only did we do that, but we did that under the very false impression that our grasp of the faith is the one to have anyway. So it's easy to isolate yourself
Mm-hmm.
from the rest of the Christian world because the one we have, this is the legitimate one. If you integrate something, you experience your faith from their perspective as well.
That's
One
right.
of the things
Yeah.
I want to argue for in the chapters that you said, where I kind of defined terms and laid out historiography,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I want to advocate for is the benefit of that experience can have on a person who's trying to understand something. Experience gives you perspective. It
Mm-hmm.
gives you a new angle on something. It doesn't create information. It does not create new facts. But it may
Mm-hmm.
allow you to see some facts that were always there and unobserved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that if that one of the arguments here is No person can have all experiences, so they cannot have all that. Well, you don't have to have all experiences. You have me. So since you have me, you now inherit my experiences. I have you. So I inherit your experiences. If
That's
we
right.
have it's called inherited memory. It's
Hmm.
inherited understanding. By the way, we know this intuitively. It's the reason we treat older people as as wise and we sit at their
That's
feet
right.
because we want
That's
to
right.
hear from them and learn from their experiences. So the
Hmm.
idea of siloing yourself from the experiences of others is a deliberate blindfold placed over our eyes, which affects our understanding. If we in the West sat at the feet of Western Christian voices, we would get a perspective not just on our Christianity, but on the world where we're supposed to live out this Christianity. And I gotta say this, and this is not my idea. Philip Jenkins said this 20 years ago.
Hmm.
I don't even knew the first half of the first millennium of the church's existence was dominated by global South.
That's right.
African voices that the names of which I've heard you rehearse repeatedly, but
Hmm.
the Tertullians of the world, the Cyril of Alexandria's, the Cyril of Alexandria is the one from whom we got, to no small part, our understanding of the incarnation.
Hmm.
Tertullian is credited with coining the term Trinity.
That's right.
Africans.
African straight up. Right.
This is not, that's why I love that you emphasize the word retrieval. This is not a new thing, it's going back to the old thing.
That's right. That's right.
Incorporating the voices of cultures outside of our Western norm. We messed up here when we said an hour because I could do this with you all.
Yeah, I know it. I know it. Yeah, but here's the thing. I am gonna camp out at an hour only because I want people to go get the book. I really want them to dig their teeth in. I mean, I'm telling y'all, and I'm not saying it just because like there's so many different directions we could have gone. I mean, we really just scratched the surface. I'm obviously a centerpiece of the book is this notion of evangelicalism. You just do a masterful job in terms of laying out the progression of how we get that term. Yeah, I'm not even going to give people, I'm just going to tell you go read it, because the way I think that part of the way that you, in a sense, rescue evangelicalism is going back to, a proper understanding and proper definition of it.
Yes.
And I think that in doing so, you help people to understand why it's worth fighting for.
Yes.
If you don't really know what it is, if you think it's just kind of like this social catch-all term, then it's like, I don't really need that. But I think you do a masterful job at really illustrating like what it is, giving us an understanding of it. And like I said, it just really helps us to be more in tune with why you're fighting for it in the first place.
Yeah, I'm glad you landed there. That's
Yeah.
that's a very good stopping place for us. I would argue, to put this in a phrase, I would argue that what we're dealing with is not evangelicalism at all. It's fundamentalism. It's
Mm-hmm.
Americanized fundamentalism. It's Christian nationalism on steroids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what happened here is fundamentalism co-opted the term evangelical and used it for themselves, which then gives the word a bad name. That's not original to me. Carl F.H. Henry said that
True.
almost
True.
70 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
They've co-opted the term and redefined it for their purposes. So in a nutshell, I would say that there is nothing wrong with evangelicalism. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is we're not living up to evangelicalism's sound orthodoxy
Mm.
and its sound orthopraxy. The problem is not the faith, it's how we're living it. It's a bad witness.
Wow.
And so to fix that, our responsibility is to return to our first love. It's theological retrieval. We don't have to invent a new thing. We have to repent and go back to the old thing.
All right now. Hey man. Well, I just want to just echo again. I love the book, man. I truly appreciate you coming on. Y'all, please go out and get this book. I'm telling you, it's worth every moment that you're going to spend with it. We didn't even get to all the examples that you gave, some of the later chapters about of individuals who have gotten it right, in American
Oh,
history. And
yes.
I mean, we could have spent a whole hour just going through that. But
Listen,
maybe that's what we'll do. Was that?
is that inverted? Oh, yours is
Oh
right.
no, you're good. Yeah, you got it. There it is, right there.
Yeah, there
There
you
it
go.
is.
The reason I'm doing this is because I'm very bad at self promotion, very bad at it. But there are
Okay.
several books that have this or very similar titles, and I want people to know what the cover looks like.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, appreciate that for sure. Yeah, mine hasn't come in the mail yet. I'm anticipating, I guess, tomorrow.
Yeah,
But yeah, there it is, y'all. You know, what I'm saying? Don't buy the wrong Burning House book. You know what I mean?
right.
Like, make sure you buy that one right there, man. But I was thinking, man, maybe we should have you come back on, like maybe in a little bit. I'll give you like a month or so to recuperate from all the promotions and stuff like that. But just to kind of talk about maybe some of the insights we didn't get to. That'd be fascinating, bro.
See, as you said earlier, this is not hard work. This is if you and I would sit when you were in Denver, we went to breakfast, and when we were done, I thought we could have just recorded this and put this out. This is
Yeah, that would have been right there.
an
Exactly.
organic conversation for us. We get it in. So
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Y'all know what it is, man. But that's why I love it though. Like again, I didn't have this coming up. You know what I'm saying? I didn't have a Brandon Washington to talk to and churn ideas about in terms of wrestling with my faith, and I didn't have a burning house to pick up. And so I feel like in many ways there's a generation of young men. And I keep saying black, but I want to be clear. Like this is not just a book for black people. Let me stop saying that. Young Christians, period. I'm saying this is something that you would not have gotten a decade ago. And I think it's very significant. It's very important. And you definitely stepping on some toes. But you brought some gauze with you too to wrap them up after you did that. You know what I mean? You brought a couple splints in there at the end. So it's a beautiful thing, man. But hey, man, I'm gonna let you get up out of here. Definitely go out and check out and buy A Burning House. I'm saying it's available wherever books are sold. You will be glad that you did. And y'all know what it is, man. Once again, this Tru-ID Apologetics. Love God, love people. Take care of the things that God blesses you with.
okay, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.